ranking my most highly anticipated fights of 2025, the fights that I can't wait for, that I'm literally thinking about all the time, and also the fights that I'm completely indifferent about or ones that I hate. All right, so let's get into this. There are some fights that I hate, and we're going to get to that very soon, but let me give you an example of a fight that I'm just kind of indifferent about. Sean Strickland versus Dricus du Plessis, and this is also just because of how hyped I was for Khamzat Chimaev versus Dricus du Plessis, and I know that there are still people out there that definitely think that Khamzat's done nothing. He's beaten one middleweight. Like, he literally fought Kamaru Usman and took out Robert Whittaker, who was riding a 2-fight win streak in the first round, and they're giving this fight to Sean Strickland, who's beaten Paulo Costa by a split decision. Beat Paulo Costa with flimsy teep kicks, one of the most boring performances I've ever seen. His worst performance of his entire career, and now he's getting rewarded with the rematch. I understand the first fight was a banger. I understand this is going to be a fun fight. I get it. But because Khamzat Chimaev and that fight was right there, this one is just not hype at all. I'm sorry. I just could not care less about this one. This is just a formality. Not even. It's even worse. We don't even need this. But whatever. Sean Strickland and Dricus du Plessis, the replay is going to go down. Again, it'll be fun. It'll be hype the week of, but I'm just not even hyped at all, man. Let's get on to the next one. Belal Muhammad and Shavkat Rakhmonov. This one would have been pretty decent if it had actually taken place at UFC 310. The only issue is Shavkat's performance was a bit of a letdown. It wasn't entertaining. And because of that, and also because Belal Muhammad, listen, Belal is underrated as far as entertainment goes. I actually don't think he's that boring, but it's still a Belal Muhammad title fight. You know what I mean? It's not necessary. It's not a big fight feel. You get my point? Belal Muhammad, when you hear his name, you're not like, oh, this is going to be an absolute banger. It's okay. I mean, I guess it's a high-level fight. That's what you're saying about a Belal fight these days. Oh, it's a pretty high-level matchup. This is going to be a fight between the two most deserving fighters in the division, but that's not necessarily a fight that you just can't wait for. All right? I'm not that hyped for Belal and Shavkat Rakhmonov. Again, as we get closer, it'll be interesting. I think it's going to be a fun fight, but come on, man. You're not thinking about this. All right? You're really not thinking about this. Let's talk about a fight that I absolutely hate, though, that people are talking about. There's some rumors that this might actually be happening because Alex Pereira is saying that he's not going to be fighting Magomed Ankalaev next, which is a disgrace. That's an abomination. I don't know who's ducking who. I don't know if it's the UFC that's making this difficult to happen and they want Khamzat to fight Alex Pereira, but that is the most irrelevant fight ever. And also, it's the worst fight you can make for Alex Pereira. Alex Pereira is one of the most popular UFC fighters ever. He is right now the face of the UFC, coming off of one of the best years that any fighter has ever had. And one of the most impactful years that any fighter has ever had. And now they're just going to feed him to Khamzat Chimaev. It's like, dude, the test when it comes to a grappler is Magomed Ankalaev. And the good thing about that is that Magomed isn't even that dominant of a grappler. For the most part, he's a freaking striker. But at least, okay, he's from Dagestan, brother. At least he will shoot a couple of takedowns every once in a while. Okay, that's the test. That's the light heavyweight. But we're just going from, dude, no, we don't want to see it, to Alex Pereira fighting the best grappler in all of MMA. We're just going to get rid of him. Yeah, Pereira, best year ever. We're just going to get rid of you with Khamzat fight. Because listen, I know that Pereira's got some fans. I'm a fan of Pereira. I'm talking about Pereira's biggest glazers, though. Listen, I understand that you guys think Pereira can beat anyone sometimes, but like, I get it. He's like 50 pounds bigger than Khamzat, but still, I think Khamzat Chimaev would choke him out in one round. And I just think that's the most anticlimactic way for Alex Pereira's title reign to end. Oh yeah, he's just going to get choked out in the first round by Khamzat. Whereas we could have Alex Pereira buckling around Magomed Ankalaev. Oh, those leg kicks are adding up, right? Or we also could have, oh, here we go. Magomed took him down. Magomed's starting to beat him up. Magomed's landing. That's the fight we want to see. And then can you imagine Ankalaev versus Khamzat Chimaev? It's like, bro, that's just not even an interesting fight. What the fuck are we doing? What are we doing? We have Khamzat, who has a bit of a beef with Sean Strickland. You've got the Dricus du Plessis fight. What are we doing talking about having this guy fight Alex Pereira next? What the fuck? And if you have Alex Pereira knock out Khamzat Chimaev, now his hype is gone. And if he goes down to 185 again and fights for a title there, no one gives a fuck. So this is the dumbest fight you could ever make, UFC. Don't make this fight. Make the Ankalaev and Alex Pereira fight, all right? Even Pereira fans are starting to get a little bit frustrated with what's going on here. I don't get it. And you know what would be even worse? If they do like Alex Pereira versus some kind of a striker. Pereira versus Olberg. Pereira versus Olberg. Fuck you. I want to see Alex Pereira and Magomed Ankalaev now. All right? That is the fight to make. This might be my most highly anticipated fight. I think Alex beats Magomed Ankalaev. I think he beats him. I think it's a close fight. It's a necessary fight. It's absolutely necessary that he fights not only the most deserving contender, the guy that nobody has beaten since Paul Craig, but also the guy that is the Dagestani wrestler, all right? And he's not even that much of a wrestler, which even makes it more interesting. It's a guy that can strike and wrestle. But now we're talking about, oh, you want to see him take on like a wrestling threat? Let's just have him get choked out in the first minute against Khamzat. Great. Fuck that, all right? I don't need to see, we got to come up with the biggest matchup for Pereira, the ones that the fans are, this is what the UFC is thinking. Khamzat's more popular, and he still kind of represents the same kind of thing that Magomed does, right? The grappling. We got to make that fight instead. No, fuck that. Give Magomed his title shot, okay? Give him his title shot, and it's a competitive fight. And Pereira, it's like, all right, Pereira's either going to flying knee Khamzat Chimaev, or Chimaev's going to choke him out in 1 minute, whereas Pereira and Magomed could be like a really good 3-4 round fight. What are we doing talking about Khamzat versus Alex Pereira? Like, it's a fucking disgrace. Khamzat moved up to 185, and he's had 2 fights. He deserves a title shot. And they're doing Strickland versus Duplessis. Maybe it's because Khamzat wouldn't have been ready for the Australia card, but my goodness, like, enough messing around. Pereira versus Magomed, announce it now. And Khamzat Chimaev versus Alex Pereira is an abomination. Pathetic. You're just going to ruin Pereira if he loses. And now Khamzat's a champion in this division where there's no history of a Khamzat fight. He's not fought any light heavyweights. And he's done all that work at middleweight for what? Absolutely nothing. And now he's going to fight Magomed Ankalaev. Whoa! Khamzat versus Magomed is the most hyped up fight ever. Said nobody ever. We're hyped about Alex versus Magomed. Magomed is not a fan favorite. Now is the time. Now is the time. This is the most hyped Magomed has ever been because of all the dicking around about not making this fight. That's why he's so hyped up right now. It's because he's the dark horse of the division. He is finally a guy that you could sell to the fans. Come on. Enough messing about. Volk versus Diego Lopez. Most hyped up fight ever. Now, but listen. I'm going to put Volk and Diego Lopez in the... I'm going to say that's the decent tier. Listen, if I thought that Volkanovski could easily win this one... By the way, we're going to try to make the Volk interview happen. Shout out to Volkanovski. He says that he's down to do the interview. We're going to try to make this happen. But I'm right off the bat not putting this in the A tier because... Ilia Topuria would have had to have moved up to lightweight. And that means that the winner of this fight will not really feel like the true best fighter at 145 pounds, right? And I just dread any fight that Volk is going to go into against a power puncher these days, okay? That's kind of another thing. For me, as a fan of Volkanovski, anytime he goes in there against a guy that can knock him out with one uppercut, like Diego Lopez, who has nasty power in his hands, I dread those fights. So I'm going to say decent tier. I think Volk would beat Diego Lopez. I think he would beat him up. I mean, I remember Volkanovski saying that he liked the Oliveira matchup more than the Makhachev matchup when he was the backup replacement fighter for Makhachev and Oliveira in Abu Dhabi. He was talking about how Makhachev would be a lot more difficult. And Diego Lopez is a very similar stylistic matchup to Charles Oliveira. So I think that this is a winnable fight. I could kind of see it being like the Ortega fight. I know Lopez is better than Ortega on the feet, but I don't think Volkanovski is dealing with the same high-level boxer as Ilia Topuria. But again, it's like coming off of 2 KO losses against a power puncher. That's a scary fight, but, you know, it would be pretty high level, would be pretty awesome. But the fact that Ilia Topuria would no longer be in the division and he would have to relinquish the belt for Volkanovski and Diego Lopez to fight next, I think that would kind of dull it a little bit. But let's get on to the next one. A incredibly hypothetical matchup between Demetrius Johnson and Alexander Pantoja. Now, I don't think this is going to happen. 99.9% sure this doesn't happen. But if it were to happen, this would be one of the most hyped fights ever. Just thinking about, could a older Demetrius Johnson come back and beat the dominant champion Alexander Pantoja, or could Pantoja show him up and shut up all of the Demetrius Johnson fanboys? Not saying that they have no reason to be hyped about Demetrius Johnson, but I just know that a lot of people would be saying things like, DJ buy whatever he wants, man. Oh, this is going to be literally a fly swat for DJ's going to get him out of there as easily as you would if you had a fly on your desk and you had a fly swatter. It would be that easy for Demetrius Johnson. That's how his fans would act, even though it would be an extremely difficult fight because he's no longer in his prime and Pantoja is in his prime. I don't know who would win this. It'd be like a pretty even fight in my opinion, but I think it'd be pretty interesting to see the Demetrius Johnson fans, oh, it's going to be the easiest fight of his life, man. Even though they haven't even seen some of his ONE FC fights, some of them were competitive. And then, of course, you're going to have the Pantoja fans that are going to be saying, man, who's this guy Demetrius, brother? The casuals that are going to be saying, man, DJ's overrated. You know, it's just one of those. It's going to be an interesting one. It's going to be a good build-up. In contrast, Pantoja versus Figueiredo, I don't want to see it. I'm sorry. I'm not hyped for that fight at all. I know that this is a rematch if it were to go down in 2025. Figueiredo won the first time, but it's like, all right, Figueiredo just lost to Jan. He's looking really good at 135 pounds, and now he's going to go on another brutal weight cut back down to the division in which he looked to be decaying in. I mean, the last time Figueiredo fought at Flyweight, he looked like he was a shell of his former self. All right, it looked like he was old, withered. He's just not very good anymore at 125 pounds. And it's just like a forced matchup. What the heck are we doing? Why are we making this and not Manel Kape versus Alexander Pantoja? I think it's a disgrace that the UFC just did Manel Kape versus Royval. And I'm going to say, I'm, you know what the fuck? What are we doing? You want more contenders? You might just get rid of the most popular flyweight contender that just had the perfect showing out performance on the last card of the year. Manel Kape, with all the emotes he was doing, Manel Kape just had like an Anderson Silva-esque prime performance, and they're risking having this guy lose to Royval, who is really good. Royval is great, but he's lost 2 times to the champion, and if he beats him, it's like, all right, now we're seeing Royval versus Pantoja 3, which could be interesting, but there's just no hype on that fight. So why are they making this? They should have done Royval versus Kai Kara France. They should have done Manel Kape versus Kai Kara France. Anything but this. Anything but this. Kape versus Pantoja would be epic, even though I think Pantoja would easily beat him. Another fight, Yuri versus Hill. I'm going to say this is decent. I think if we were to be talking about this before Yuri got knocked out twice by Alex Pereira and before Jamal Hill made his return, I would say this is S tier. I was talking about how this could be the greatest fight of all time, and it certainly has potential to be one of the greatest fights of all time, but it's hard to be that hyped up for a Yuri Prochazka fight and a Jamal Hill fight when both guys are coming off of fights where they got completely embarrassed. Jamal Hill got embarrassed by Pereira. Yuri Prochazka got completely schooled in his last fight, and that's the last time we've seen these guys in the cage. They've both taken losses, and even though they're still relatively young in their prime, I have a hard time being that hyped up for fighters that just got their ass kicked. You know what I mean? They're not coming in with a lot of aura, is basically what I'm saying. So it's a great fight, but I'm not that hyped for it. But, of course, that has to do with the circumstance that we're in right now. Another one, Blachowicz versus Olberg, kind of indifferent about this. If this was made a year ago, if this was made like directly after the Pereira fight, I'd be a little bit more hyped for it. But Blachowicz has been out of the cage for such a long time. He's old. He's coming off of a shoulder surgery. And Blachowicz was one of those older, crafty guys that's still really good. But again, it's like now he's been out for 2 years. Not 2 years, like a year and a half. Horrible shoulder injury. And now he's going to be facing Olberg, who I don't think Olberg would ever beat Blachowicz if Blachowicz was in his prime. Now, maybe we still haven't seen prime Olberg, but Olberg's been in the UFC for like 3 years now. Damn near 4 years, all right? He's not that far off from his prime. This is one of those where it's like, dude, this guy could have never beaten Jan in his prime, but now he might go out there and beat Jan just because Jan's old. And we're not going to see the best version of Jan. We're just not going to see the best version of Jan. And for that reason, because I'm a Blachowicz fan, I'm dreading this one, and I don't really want to see it. So I'm not even going to say it's in the decent tier. I don't really want to see it, man. But let's get on to the next one. Pimblett versus Chandler. Dude, you know what? I'm going to be honest. I'm indifferent to this fight. I think it's the wrong fight to make. Like, listen, it's going to be a cool fight. Don't get me wrong. It is going to be a cool fight, but especially after seeing how easily Oliveira was able to take down Chandler. And I know it's Oliveira, and he's done more than Pimblett, and he's proven himself more at the top. Like, I get that. But Paddy Pimblett, there's like a theme, right? For example, Tony Ferguson got out-grappled by Oliveira, and then everyone started out-grappling Tony Ferguson. Dariush did it, right? Even Bobby Green did it. Paddy Pimblett did it. It's like, as soon as someone shows how to beat Michael Chandler by just taking him down, because no one ever offensively wrestles against him, then we're just going to start to see everyone doing it. And I think that's the kind of performance we're going to see, where Paddy just takes him down, takes his back, controls him. You know, the striking can be kind of interesting. I guess Chandler could knock him out for that. You know what? I'm going to slide it up to decent, because I actually think this could be a Chandler KO on the feet, which could make it interesting, right? And Paddy's wrestling is not as good as Oliveira's, but I would have rather have seen like Paddy fight a Moicano, Paddy fight a Benoit Saint Denis, but Paddy fighting like Michael Chandler, notorious for not having a good fight IQ, for kind of just letting fights slip through his hands, and also coming off of a performance where he looked like sort of a washed up version of himself. And he didn't look like he was fighting on the back foot, patient Chandler. I'm not that hyped for it. I'm really not that hyped for it. I wanted to see Paddy against a Moicano. That could have been really fun. That would have been the perfect matchup. Or even a Benoit Saint Denis. But we're giving him an old fighter. Like, at a certain point, you got to stop giving Paddy these old heads. Bobby Green, Tony Ferguson, Michael Chandler. At a certain point, give Paddy Pimblett, a guy in his prime. Even, as I said, Benoit Saint Denis, I'm not even saying because Benoit's super dangerous, but at least he's like in his prime, durable. He can improve. But you're giving him all these guys that have like completely lost their chin, that are on a downslide, that are just slower than ever. What are we doing? It's not that hype. The UFC needs to understand, okay, you do this if it's their 4th UFC fight, but it's Paddy Pimblett's 7th or 8th fight. At this point, you got to be giving him the Fizieves, but they're... Because I think Pimblett's good. I think Pimblett could even beat a Rafael Fiziev. I know some fans would say, oh, what he's saying, Fiziev would spinning wheel kick him in 1 minute. Fiziev would eat him alive, bro. Even though Pimblett could take Fiziev down and choke him out, right? I think Fiziev would probably win that. But listen, it's a competitive fight. I don't know, man. Because if Pimblett wins this fight, then people are going to be saying, man, Pimblett's the real deal. But it's beating who? Beating old, washed-up fighters. I'm done with it, man. If this is Rafael Fiziev coming up the ranks, he's not fighting old, washed-up fighters. Fiziev fought Moicano, all right? Fiziev was in there with Brad Riddell, man. Brad Riddell, one of the trickiest fighters one of the trickiest fighters ever. Fiziev was in there with Mateusz Gamrot. He was in there with Justin Gaethje, right? But I have a feeling that Paddy Pimblett wins this fight, and they're going to give him Justin Gaethje after Gaethje gets knocked out again. That's like the type of matchup they would make. Pimblett versus Gaethje after Gaethje's been chinned by Dan Hooker. That's the fight they're going to make, dude. Enough. I think once you make the rankings, like, you can't fight one of these older guys if you've just fought a bunch of old heads. I understand there's some old guys in the rankings, Chandler, Dariush. The UFC wants to have them as like a stepping stone for the younger fighters. I get that. I understand that. But I don't want to see it every single time, dude. I don't want to see the guy rising through the ranks having to go through only these fighters. When you have fighters like Grant Dawson that's just taking on prime fighter versus prime fighter versus prime fighter. Mateusz Rebecki. You think they're going to give Mateusz Rebecki this treatment? No, they're doing Rebecki versus Odobai. Rebecki versus fucking Diego Ferreira. They're giving these guys the killers every fucking time. All right? It's becoming too obvious. Paddy Pimblett is good. We don't need to baby him this much. All right? So, like, dude, I'm indifferent about this fight. I'm sorry. I'm moving it back down. Brady versus Jack Della Maddalena. Listen, I would love to talk about a JDM versus Carlos Pratas fight, a JDM versus Jeff Neal fight, or a JDM versus Ian Gary fight. But I think that they're going to make this because JDM is ranked number 4. JDM hardly ever fights. He's kind of like Shavkat. He fights like once a year these days. Back in the day, JDM was active, but nowadays he's always injured. But he's ranked number 4, very high because of that Gilbert Burns win. And of course, Sean Brady is ranked very high as well. Both guys just beat Gilbert Burns. I have a feeling they're going to rebook this, and I am just not that hyped for it, man. I'm not that hyped. I want to see JDM in one of these like Yuri versus Hill type of matchups where it's just like striker versus striker, high output striker Jeff Neal on the feet versus high output striker JDM on the feet, or JDM versus Prates. One of these matchups. JDM versus Sean Brady. I know Jack Della Maddalena has good grappling. I get it. I mean, he was able to defend well on the ground against Gilbert Burns. He was able to sweep Gilbert Burns once. And, you know, his team, especially Craig Jones, who's like a training partner of his, Craig Jones will talk about like how insanely good JDM is and how he's one of the few MMA guys that actually impresses him, right? So this could be competitive, but I just have a feeling that Sean Brady takes him down and out-grapples him for 5 rounds, and it's a Sean Brady win, and that's it for JDM for the next year and a half. We won't see him again. So for that reason, I'm not that hyped for it. Okay. Dan Hooker versus Justin Gaethje. I'm going to say that's in the decent tier. Decent tier just because Gaethje's coming off of a KO loss, and I kind of feel bad for him, right? Because I know that they're going to give him a matchup against like a guy that's surging, like Dan Hooker. Dan Hooker, back in the day, I cannot believe there was a time in Dan Hooker's career just about a year and a half ago where we were saying this guy was washed, right? Dan Hooker going into the Jalen Turner fight, myself included, was saying he's done. He's not the same guy, taking too much damage, slower than ever, slowpoke, right? And now he's riding a win streak, 3-fight win streak, beating Mateusz Gamrot in a barn burner, by the way. That was a really good fight. I think Dan Hooker is going to knock Justin Gaethje out. I can't believe I'm saying that, but for that reason, listen, I'm a fan of Dan Hooker's fight style. I'm a fan of Justin Gaethje, but I feel so bad for the way Gaethje went out last time. That was such a brutal way of getting KO'd, face planted after getting schooled. If he had put up a good fight with Max and then got KO'd, I wouldn't feel as bad, but he got schooled and then face planted. That was the worst way to lose. I don't want to see him go out there and get KO'd by Hooker. So for that reason, I'll say decent. If you made this fight like 2 years ago after the Poirier fight when Gaethje was doing well at the time as well, then I would have been like, all right, this is like an S tier fight. But right now, kind of dreading it a little bit. Kind of dreading it. Mick Parkin versus Marcin Tybura, who has tons of aura. Marcin Tybura, even though I almost forgot his name, I'm going to say the recently freed Marcin Tybura beats Mick Parkin, and I'm actually pretty hyped for this because Mick Parkin surprised us by showing us some pop. Mick Parkin actually showed us that he had some power in his hands last time getting a KO. But this is one of those fights where I know people are going to be picking Mick Parkin because of the Aspinall training partner. He trains at the same gym. He's the new hyped up prospect out of the UK. Mick Parkin, right? He seems like a great guy, by the way. But in terms of his skills, I just know he's going to lose to Marcin Tybura, who is underrated. Marcin Tybura has the best ground and pound at heavyweight outside of like the top 5 guys. Outside of like Aspinall, right, Jones, all these guys. Marcin Tybura actually is a finisher on the ground. Like, he's dangerous. Choked out Taito Ivasa, TKO'd his last opponent. He has tons of ground and pound TKOs and submissions. He's a finisher. The most under-the-radar finisher in heavyweight history. He's sort of like the first gatekeeper before the Volkovs and the Blades. You know what I mean? Like, those are gatekeepers all the way at the top. You beat Volkov, you get a title fight. Before you get to that level, Marcin Tybura is like the first gatekeeper. I think that he beats Mick Parkin. It's just a fun fight. Prospect versus like guy that's going to be doubted and counted out. I just have a feeling a lot of people pick Mick Parkin, so it's going to be like, yeah, I'm going to be on the right side of that one. So looking forward to that. That's a decent fight. Pretty hyped for it. Cannonier versus Obama, the Brazilian Obama, Gregory Rodriguez. Kind of indifferent about this, right? Listen, if this fight was made a year ago after the Vettori fight, I would have been super hyped. But now Cannonier's coming off of a loss to Cal Baraujo. Doesn't really look like the same fighter he was in the past. I think his age is finally starting to catch up to him. And for that reason, I'm just not that excited for this one. I would have much rather have seen Rodriguez versus Kopylov. And we could have done Cannonier versus Chris Curtis. We could have switched those matchups up. Curtis versus Cannonier. two old heads, and we could have done Rodriguez versus Kopylov. Or we could have done Rodriguez versus someone else. I don't know, like Marvin Vettori would have been interesting, even though that's kind of similar, but we're doing the old head versus the surging contender. So those fights to me are never that exciting because you kind of already know who's going to win. Pavlovich versus Jairzinho. This is the type of fight where you don't really think about it at all until like the week of the fight, and you only think about it for a second. You just know who you're going to pick right off the bat, and you never think about it until the night of the fight after that. But when these guys are walking out, like that's a level of hype that you hardly feel. That's like one of those big fight feels when you have two heavyweight knockout artists walking out to the cage after like a flyweight fight. That's when it gets hype. Okay, that's when it gets really, really hype. Sergey Pavlovich versus Jairzinho Rosenstrike is going to be a sick fight on the night, right? Because it's like one of those simple ones. Okay, this guy's going to knock out the other guy, or this guy's going to win by KO too. All right? Not a whole lot going on. Not a lot of X's and O's to break down. Pavlovich could be different after getting KO'd and after getting schooled by Volkov. Might not have the same confidence, and Jairzinho has been doing pretty well. So this is going to be an interesting fight. I think Pavlovich wins. Listen, Jairzinho couldn't put away Shamil, but Shamil's durability is off the charts, actually. But this is going to be a sick fight, okay? Going to be a great fight. But I can't say it's A tier, because A tier, you got to really, okay, you're going to be making a breakdown off of it, right? We're not doing that for this fight. Oliveira versus Ilia Topuria. I'm going to say that's S tier, man. I was thinking about A tier. It's obviously more hype than all of these, right? There's a little bit of an asterisk on basically every single one of these in the decent tier. This one has no asterisks, but the only reason why it's not S tier hype for me is because I still think that Topuria would be the favorite. It would be really sick if there was like a whole coalition of fans that were saying Oliveira buy whatever he wants. Just Oliveira's just too big for him, just too much for him. I could already see tons of fans saying things like, dude, Oliveira's way too big, man. Topuria's got no chance. He's moving up a weight class, not his division. Like, just turning casual on us. But I actually think most fans would pick Topuria. The fight that has that, like, that Topuria gets crushed element is the Islam Makhachev versus Ilia Topuria, which to me is S tier because, and I'll tell you why. I think Topuria beats all of them, all right? That's why. I think Topuria beats all of them, and what makes it so exciting is that I'm going to be picking the underdog versus I'm going to be picking the favorite. You know what I mean? Like, both of these fights are extremely hype. Topuria versus Makhachev is more hype than Volkanovski versus Makhachev because Volk was in his prime, but at the time going into that fight, Makhachev had so much aura after the Oliveira win. So much aura because of how good he looked in that fight that I thought Volk was going to get destroyed. Even though I recognize that this is going to be a competitive fight, I think that this is the guy that has like potential to knock Makhachev's lights out. And we've not really seen a whole lot of that. Again, Poirier was older, right? He was coming off of one win, but before that got KO'd. And Poirier's not known for one-punch devastating power. Poirier has knocked a lot of people out. But come on, man. People that say Poirier hits harder. No, the fuck he doesn't. He does not hit harder than Ilia Topuria. That's absolutely nonsense. Topuria KOs are like, boom, they're rocked. One more shot, it's over. Or one shot and that's it. Dustin Poirier KOs are like fourth, third round overwhelming volume KOs that are a little bit different. Poirier obviously hits hard, dude, but come on. Like, this is the most powerful, devastating knockout puncher that Islam has ever faced. Plus, he has the lighter man skill. Okay? And it's going to be interesting to see how Makhachev approaches another like stocky build type of fighter. Will that give him issues again? And will Topuria be able to put up as good of a fight as Volkanovski on the ground? Will he be worse? He's been held down on his back. We've never seen Volk get held down. Yeah, dude. Never seen it. Never happened. Volk never got done like that, like Mitchell did to Topuria. But listen, after the glaze, I think that this is one of the most hyped up fights ever. But this one, I kind of do recognize Topuria versus Oliveira, that most people would probably be picking Topuria, right? Most people would probably go with Topuria. If Oliveira had chinned Michael Chandler in one round or submitted him in one, then it'd be a little bit different. But I think because Topuria would be the favorite, we kind of would think that he would win anyway, but it's still a really excellent fight. Oliveira is still maybe at his peak, right? And this is Topuria versus like a much bigger fighter, but also like a guy that's capable of holding him down on the ground, right? So this would be a really fun fight, and it'd be a huge legacy fight for both of them. So that's A tier though. But Topuria and Makhachev is S tier. And part of that is just because a lot of people are saying Makhachev is the one to take his O. I actually disagree with that. So I just think it'd be a really fun build-up. There'd be a lot of good breakdowns, a lot of good debate. So for that reason, that's S tier. Also just one of the greatest, most competitive matchups of all time. So let's get on to the next one. Jones versus Aspinall, S tier. Pretty obvious if this even happens. You know, for a long time I was saying there's no way this will ever happen, but Jones has not retired yet. And that leads me to believe that he's still negotiating. And for that reason, I think that this could actually happen. But of course, this would be S tier because of all the buildup, all the talk throughout the past couple of years. Tom Aspinall is a guy that could put Jones's lights out. And if Jones wins, then that really does solidify him as the greatest of all time. Zhang versus Suarez, okay? Zhang Weili versus Tatiana Suarez. You know what? I think this is a decent fight. And I'll tell you why. Because there's going to be a lot of talk going into this. Normally it's Zhang versus one of these other WMMA fighters, and most of us just think, oh, Zhang wins. Let's get on to the next one. Yeah, I think Zhang's going to win. That's it. The breakdown in your 30-minute, 40-minute prediction video for the whole card is going to spend, you're going to have like a 30-second breakdown on this one, okay? But Suarez is like a hardcore fan favorite. They call her the female Habib.
Mate, you don't understand. Tatiana Suarez is just a monster.
Right?
I just think Tatiana's just going to go out there and do what she does to everybody.
Not me, though. Not me, though. When it comes to WMMA, I always root for the one that is the most entertaining. And Zhang Weili is obviously like the one that's had entertaining fights and whatnot. She's had some grappling moments, too. But I just think Zhang Weili beats Tatiana Suarez. Tatiana Suarez, why? Because she's undefeated and she's like actually got a couple finishes. Now all of a sudden she's Habib. Like Zhang Weili is going to smoke her. All right. But I'm just looking forward to this because this is going to be a matchup where there's actually some talk about Suarez is the one. Suarez is the boogie woman. Can you imagine people calling Suarez the boogie woman? That's just insane. But that's what they're going to be doing. Dariush versus Moicano. Totally indifferent. Why are we making this matchup? Renato Moicano just had a huge fight against Benoit Saint-Denis. Before that, against Jalen Turner. He's coming off one of the best years ever, and you're going to kill and dull his hype by putting him up against a guy on a loss streak with no hype whatsoever like Beneil Dariush? What are we doing? We have to do Moicano versus Pimblett. We got to do Moicano versus someone in the top 5. But Dariush, 2-fight KO loss streak. He's completely lost his aura. The problem with this is that if Moicano wins, it does nothing for him. It does not get him any closer because then someone else at lightweight would be coming off of like a huge win. And they would probably give that fighter the number 1 contenders fight. But if you beat Dariush, it's like, all right, but you just beat Dariush. He was on a 2-fight loss streak, so it doesn't matter. So this one is just a mess up by the UFC. Dricus versus Khamzat. I'm going to put that in the A tier. That would be a really hype fight. To be honest, I'm going to put it in the decent tier, and this is why, guys. I love Khamzat Chimaev, okay? And I'm a big fan of Dricus du Plessis too. But it's just kind of hard for me to get hyped for fights where I think there's a good chance of them ending in the first 3 minutes. Right? And it's not a KO. Right? Listen, submissions are awesome. And if you're just thinking about, all right, how impressive is it to submit someone in the first 3 minutes in a title fight against a well-rounded fighter like Dricus du Plessis? Yes, that's insanely impressive. But actually seeing it go down, it's always going to be less dramatic as a KO, right? It's going to be more anticlimactic than a KO. When we were thinking about the Whittaker fight, we were hyped because, oh, Whittaker could stuff a couple takedowns and he could bring it into deep waters, right? Seeing Khamzat go out there and submit people in 1 round is amazing, again. But I can't get that hyped when I think the fight could end in 2 minutes. I'm sorry, man. Like, it's a sick fight. It's a sick matchup. And also, there's still this idea that if Khamzat doesn't get the finish in the first 3 minutes, he's going to gas out and it's going to be a bit of a lackluster fight. I don't think Dricus would allow that, though. I think Dricus would make it wild. All right? That's how Dricus fights. He doesn't know any other way. I'm going to say decent here. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I'd be so excited for it. It is an amazing matchup, but for whatever reason, Khamzat is so good that if he wins, it's not going to be competitive at all. It's just going to be like anticlimactic. That's why. If Dricus wins, of course it would be a fun fight, but I think Khamzat would probably win, guys. On to the next one, Merab versus Jan. Man, I'd kind of dread this fight. I'm going to say decent because I actually think Jan is a bit of a chance. I'm a huge Jan fan. So I'm always, I always think it's possible for Jan to win any fight, but he got 50-45 the first time. I think he'd have a better performance. I think he would at least win a couple rounds, but it's just, you're fighting Merab, you're not going to have the opportunity to settle into a fight like you would if you're fighting Song, if you're fighting Figueiredo, and you have time to make adjustments on the feet. You don't have time to think. You're just in a reactionary fight with Merab the whole time. You're just reacting to whatever he does. I think Merab would win again, so for that reason, I might even have to say indifferent. Nah, I'd say decent because I think that there is something alluring about the idea of Jan winning that fight. Because if he beat Merab, he'd become the GOAT of the division. Like, that would be the settling factor. That'd be the deciding factor if he were to beat Merab. I know people would be like, oh, well, they're 1-1 then. Well, yeah, but Jan has more wins over people in their prime. But yeah, I'll say decent just because I think Jan's got a little bit of a chance. Next up, Sandhagen versus O'Malley. I'm going to say A tier. I think that this would be a fun fight. I think that Sandhagen could beat O'Malley by taking him to the ground and out-grappling him. I think Sandhagen's grappling has gotten to a really high level. We saw that in the Umar fight. We've seen that in his fights before then when he was out-grappling Marlon Vera. O'Malley's pretty good defensively, but I think that Sandhagen could frustrate him. And I also just think it'd be interesting to see the striking exchanges. I think it'd be interesting to see Sandhagen try to redeem himself after his lackluster striking performance against Umar, where he was just switching stances and feinting the whole time. We could see the return of a active striking Corey Sandhagen. And we also just could see O'Malley show him levels and just show him a speed that he's never seen before, and O'Malley could destroy Sandhagen on the feet. So for this reason, I think it's A tier. I'm still super hyped about this fight. Adesanya versus Imavov. I'll say A tier. I think this is going to be a sick fight. I think Imavov is getting better from fight to fight. He's reaching his prime. He's well-rounded. Adesanya is coming off of a great performance, and he's no longer going to be like the defensive Izzy, cruise mode Izzy. So I think this is going to be a war. I think Imavov also has a chance to win. And Adesanya losing to Dricus is one thing. Losing in a title fight to Strickland is one thing, but losing to Imavov. But there's still pressure because you're one of the greatest middleweights of all time. And fair enough, you lose to Strickland. No, Strickland's gone on to become a UFC legend, right? But there still is a little bit pressure because, again, losing to a champion is different than losing to Imavov, who does not have a lot of hype, doesn't have like a huge fan base. Then you're going to start losing to the Imavovs, and then you may as well throw in Michael Pereira. If Imavov beats you, then everyone beats you, is basically what I'm saying. Now, obviously, that's not the case, but essentially, the way it would work for Adesanya's aura is if Imavov, this guy that doesn't have a whole lot of aura himself, beats Adesanya, then it's like, all right, well, that's rough, right? That's rough. O'Malley versus Jan. I'm going to say decent. I would dread it a little bit, knowing that the judges always love O'Malley. And also, I would dread it because Jan won the first time, but it was very close. I also dread O'Malley just straight up beating Jan in the rematch and just outstriking him and clearly winning, which, again, O'Malley's got a fun style, but I'm a bigger fan of Jan. I would want Jan to win. And seeing him get like actually beat for real against O'Malley after the first fight where everyone thought he won would just be really sad to see. So yeah, that'd be rough. Arman versus Makhachev. I'm going to say this is A tier. As we get closer to it, I'm starting to think that Makhachev's going to win. Right? If you were to ask me a couple weeks ago, I'd say S tier because I think that Tsarukyan has a really good chance. But, we'll see. I'll say this is A tier, though. It's about as high level as it gets. So, still a really hype fight. This is one of those fights that you're going to be pacing back and forth thinking about, Arman could do well here, but Makhachev's just too dangerous here, right? You'll actually be pacing back and forth thinking about it. Magomedov versus Page. I'm going to say that's going to be decent. I think that Michael Page is going to win this fight, but it could also be a little bit of a slower fight. Not a whole lot of output, like a real chess match could be a little bit slow. There could not be a whole lot to judge. On to the next one. Gane versus Aspinall. You know, it's kind of sad because back in the day, this would have been a really interesting fight, but it's just not the same. After that loss to Volkov, Cyril Gane did not look his best in that fight. Lackluster performance. Also, it looks like he's regressed a tiny bit. Maybe that's just Volkov getting better and Gane staying the same, but you know, you look at what Aspinall's doing to a Volkov, and he's getting him out of there in one round. And you could say, well, Volkov's improved. He wouldn't do. Well, Aspinall's gotten better as well. And he's also packed on even more weight. And he probably hits even harder. If you look at Aspinall in that Volkov fight, and you look at him now, Aspinall looks like he's gained 15 pounds since then. And I'm not talking about gotten fat, like he's just put on more mass, more muscle. Aspinall is better than ever. Gane has stayed the same. Gane is not a dangerous fighter. Gane still has problems when it comes to his grappling. I just, you know, if Gane had schooled Volkov, it'd be interesting, but he's coming off of a loss. If they make this fight next, it's just not going to be that hype. It's going to be one of those, well, I guess Aspinall by whatever he wants, and that's never that hype. Last but not least, Merab versus Umar. I'm going to say A tier, okay? I'm going to put that in the A tier. Very hyped for this one because there's a lot on the line. Two brothers. There's even beef going on. There's a lot of tension, right? Merab, when he fought Jan, it was like a similar buildup. But the difference was Merab was being counted out in that fight, whereas now he's the champion. We know how good Merab is, and there's this guy coming up who seems like he's just got everything going for him. He's got plot armor. He's on the same card as Makhachev. He's being trained by Khabib. There's a lot going on for Umar right now. Right? Everything's going perfectly for him, and Merab's getting a little bit iffy. Merab's getting a little bit nervous. Merab is starting to feel the pressure. There's an idea that Merab, because he's under all this pressure, because he feels like he's being rushed by the UFC and he's being forced to fight this guy that doesn't deserve it, we could see him fight emotionally and not fight at his best. But there's also an idea that when Merab gets angry, that's when he fights even better because he was mad at Jan. He felt Jan disrespected him, and he went in that fight and had the best performance of his entire life. So it could work for him. It could work against him. I don't know how it's going to work. So that's why it's not in the S tier. If I thought that this was for sure going to work for Merab, like if I felt confident in Merab being as confident as possible, I'd say it's S tier because I just think the idea of Merab beating an Umar Nurmagomedov would just be insane. Because again, the Nurmagomedovs, we never really see them fight other brothers. So it'd be one of those interesting ones. But because it just kind of feels like Umar might win this one, it's not as hype. When a Nurmagomedov is being doubted, it's super hype. Like, for example, when Makhachev is not the favorite in my mind, the fights are even crazier because the Nurmagomedovs always have an aura of invincibility. They always have an unbeatable mystique. So the fights are always more hype when you think that they might actually lose because you never really feel that way going into one of their fights. So for that reason, I'll say Merab and Umar A tier instead of S tier. Still really hyped for it. Still awesome. But that is it for my most highly anticipated fights of 2025. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Which fights are you most excited for and which fights are you not looking forward to at all?